Hello.
Hi, thank you so much for joining us. What an amazingly accomplished career you've had so far.
Oh, what can I say?
It's a total treat to have you here. Maybe to start with, you could tell us a bit about your role currently and also what the Australian Science Media Centre is for those who are just hearing about it for the first time.
Sure. So I came to Australia, as you said, in 2005 to help establish the Science Media Centre. And the Science Media Centre is actually one of a group of science media centres around the world. So the first one was opened in London in the UK in about 2002. And it was basically set up because there was a sense that trust in science was waning at the time. There was quite a few things going on, including animal research and the MMR vaccine and a lot of kind of major issues, if you like, that were undermining trust in science. And I think one of the things that they realised is that what tends to happen when you've got a controversial issue is that scientists, understandably, kind of run in the opposite direction. And, they don't mind going into the media and sort of making a song and dance if they've got some major discovery or something really exciting to tell the world. But when it comes to, telling people about the research that they're doing on animals or other things that might be controversial, they tend to kind of run away. And so the Science Media Centre was set up to try and broker that relationship, try and encourage and help the scientific community to come out, talk to the media, talk to the public at the time when the public needs to hear from them and not just when they want to do it. And so we then set up, and there's now one in Germany, one in Canada, one in the US, one in New Zealand.
Very cool. And what led you, so you finished your PhD, and then what inspired you to focus on this area more specifically?
Well, I'd always been interested in media, and even when I was doing my undergraduate degree at Macquarie University, I used to go and do workshops and courses. I did a women's radio workshop. I did, communicating science through the media and understanding television. And, it seemed like it was the kind of thing that I just didn't really even know why I was doing it other than I was interested. It was a hobby. But then I realised during my PhD and towards the end of my PhD, I realised that I enjoyed talking about slime moulds a lot more than I enjoyed actually tinkering around with them in test tubes in the lab. And so I sort of thought, well, why don't I combine my interest in media with my interest in science? And then I took off to UTS in my first role that really went down that track.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating to think about the connection between science and news media, because like you said at the beginning, sometimes people can be a bit skeptical about science. And I feel like we are in a place at the moment, particularly discussing COVID-19 and seeing how that's taking shape in America, the way they are discrediting some of their scientists and advisors. It feels like it's a really current issue that we're facing. How would you describe the relationship between science and news media?
Yes, well, so look, I think the thing is that the relationship between science and news has really changed a lot, actually, over the last decade or so. And that's partly because, the media industry has changed hugely. So if you think about it, we called it, there was a while there when we were losing so many journalists that we nicknamed it the mass extinction event, because we were just losing so many journalists from newsrooms, and a lot of them were specialist science reporters or specialist reporters, some in the arts, some in politics, some in science, some in health. And so what happened then was science started to be reported in the media when there was something big happening. So what I call flash in the pan type reporting. Because what happens is when you take the specialist reporter out of the newsroom, then there isn't anyone to follow the narrative. There's nobody to say, oh gosh, this is a really important issue and I've seen this coming. I've been following it. I've been waiting for it and here it is. And then to say to the editorial team, hey guys, we've really got to cover this because it's incredibly important and we should be doing features and we should be doing all sorts of things. If that person isn't there, then they rely basically on wire services and on press releases. And sometimes press releases, they don't necessarily focus on the things that are really important. They focus on public relations. And so you can end up with what I said, flash in the pan, which means it's here today, gone tomorrow. There's no ongoing narrative, no ongoing discussion. And we've seen that happen a lot. And that's Australia, which is about Australia.
Yeah, and I guess even contributing to that at the moment, it would be the kind of a bit of a cloud of a threat of losing our wire services as well. So then it would just fall onto those press releases.
Yes, well, luckily, AAP has been saved, but there was that worry that we'd lose our wire services, and that was a great concern. But now, strangely enough, we're going to have two wire services, one from News, one from AAP. So we're going from having one that was about to die to having two. So that's quite interesting. But still, no specialist reporters, at least not yet.
Yeah, and so I guess that opens it up to there being perhaps misinformation sort of creeping in and getting through some of those less rigorous processes. Have you seen, specifically in the situation, the period we're in now, have you seen any misinformation coming through and hitting the media?
Yes, but I have to say that I think journalists on the whole have been trying incredibly hard to provide the public with the right information. There's been a lot of challenges in the last few months, as we know, and one of the biggest challenges is this virus is new. So what happens is scientists will say, well, we think it's this. And then a month later, they'll say, actually, no, it's not that. We think it's that. And, so there's been a lot of sort of, changing messages. In the early days, also about public health, we heard that masks were not effective unless you were sick or unless you were in the frontline health arena. And then that changed. And, now, experts are saying actually masks are really important and we should all be wearing them if we've got COVID in the area. So, it's understandable that journalists are a bit confused and the public is a bit confused. And I don't blame the scientists either, because it's a new virus and the information is constantly changing. Having said that, that's very different to disinformation, which is, more along the lines of, you should inject bleach or, do away with your mobile phone because 5G is causing the virus. There's a lot of those kinds of total nonsense that's out there. But on the whole, the media is not to blame for that. That usually goes through social media channels.
Absolutely. It's funny, the injecting of bleach, because I think what was so confronting about that is that usually that kind of disinformation isn't being said by the President of the United States at a press conference.
Yeah, and look, I think that's, one of the big worries is that we know that people's trust in information and trust in science is very much influenced by their ideology. And if they follow a particular political line and those politicians choose to spread misinformation or disinformation or choose to take a certain side, then you'll find a lot of people will follow them rather than the scientists.
Yeah, and I guess is that one of the most challenging parts of tackling the misinformation and disinformation, or are there some other ones as well?
Look, I think that, there's also the problem that lots of people love to use an opportunity like COVID-19 to have their voice heard. And so you have all kinds of agendas out there, and sometimes it's nothing other than just, look at me, look at me. I don't know if you remember this, early on there was some terrible stuff going through Facebook, which was a recorded message. And it was the same words but spoken by different people and claimed to be different people. And at one point it was claiming to be a GP in, I can't remember which, Spain or somewhere. And they were saying things like, to combat the virus, all you need to do is sip water every 15 seconds. And there was a whole range of things that you could do. And of course, it's very dangerous because, people can think that they're protected by doing these various things. And there's just nothing in it. But there was a really interesting blog from an academic from UNSW. I can't remember his name now, but he wrote a really interesting. Bill Botel, that's right. he wrote a really interesting piece in the Sydney Morning Herald in March, talking about how important it is that politicians stay out of this, when it comes to the science. And just so going back to that point about, the sort of tendency of people to follow what politicians say. He said that one of the reasons why we tackled HIV/AIDS really well is that Bob Hawke and Andrew Peacock, who was in opposition at the time in the 80s, decided that they would stay out of it. They actually made a decision that this was about science and that they would not be going out into the media. So they took a step back. They both took a step back. And that enabled the science to come to the fore and enabled us to really get on top of that issue. And he's basically making the point, we have a lot to learn from that. We can, if politics stays out of these things, really important scientific issues, then we have a chance of the genuine science coming through.
That sounds like such an important approach, because looking at the way masks have become politicised, and, my Facebook feed last night was full of anti-mask wearers taking videos of themselves harassing staff workers, and that's become a really political thing. And also even thinking about climate change, that's become incredibly political rather than letting the science be at the fore. I've got to read that blog, because that's an approach that is not one that I've seen for a really long time.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm sort of thinking, gosh, well, how was it that Bob Hawke and Andrew Peacock made that decision to take a step back? How incredibly insightful of them. I don't see a lot of that kind of stepping back going on these days.
Not at all.
Yeah.
If anything, I think we see the opposite, where any chance to make something political, regardless of the repercussions, that kind of seems to be the track that we're on right now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. But having said that, I do think that on the whole, both sides of politics in Australia have been following the science, and we haven't had politicians saying you should inject bleach or you should employ 5G networks. So I don't think, we don't have nearly as big a problem as the US, of course.
That's right. So that's a good thing that, leaders and politicians, people with power, can maybe let the science take the forefront at the moment. What can we as individuals, just individuals in the street, what can we do to help combat misinformation and stay informed?
Look, I think that a lot of the misinformation is coming through social media channels, and that's not new. I mean, this has been around for a long time. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember not long after Fukushima, there was a chart that was floating around social media that looked like it was showing plumes of radiation coming our way. And there was all this chatter on social media saying, gosh, everybody living on the East Coast, we better move to WA because plume is coming our way. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be devastating. But what that chart was actually showing was wave height in the hours after the Fukushima disaster. And of course, as you can see, the wave height is really high, closer to the earthquake, and then it gets lower and it looks like it's sort of coming out, but it's just wave height. But what I found really interesting about that is, even though that was debunked numerous times over the years, every now and again it still reappears as though it were, just yesterday. And that is a real challenge, because I think, how on earth do you get on top of something like that when a whole bunch of unsuspecting people can have that pushed on them yet again after it's already been debunked? So I think we have to constantly be vigilant, looking out for those things, and constantly be prepared to jump in and say, actually, no, that was debunked, 5 years ago. Have a look at this website. So I think that it's up to all of us in a way to call it out and to always go back to the source. In that particular case, one of the big problems was that the original organisation that created it, which was a NASA-affiliated organisation in the US, somebody took that chart and basically just cropped out their logo and stuck it up. So nobody was able to go back to the source because they didn't really know where it was coming from. But wherever you have the chance to look, always look at the source. Where is this bit of information coming from? And if you find that, it's coming from a lobby group that has a particular agenda, well, you want to take it with a grain of salt.
I often think that with social media that we need to be scrutinising sources as strongly as we're taught to when we're at school. Like I think back university, but even in high school too, you had to reference everything. There's no way, you knew that you weren't allowed to reference a Wikipedia page in an essay. That was a big no-no. So I find it really interesting that when it comes to social media, we almost forget those skills we learned at school of, well, who wrote this? Why did they write it? Why have they put it out there? It would be nice. Yeah, I think you're right that we need to maybe have that approach to everything.
Yeah.
Other than going, oh, well, this video looks fun and this person suggested it, so I'm going to believe it.
Yeah, definitely. We need to learn how to tweak our bullshit radars, bullshit meters.
Absolutely.
And I think it also comes down to what friends and family tell each other on social media, and always thinking twice before sharing something. There's a lot of times when I think people just think, oh, that looks interesting. That's an interesting headline, and they'll just share it on social media without thinking too much about it. And that's what has really enabled so much misinformation to flow around the world, is our propensity to go, oh gosh, that looks curious, and just sort of tweeting it or sharing it without thinking, without ourselves checking the source before we then, reverberate it out to our own communities.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good thing for people to think about going forward, is to just take that bit longer to try and find a source. And these days with the internet, it's pretty easy to do a Google search and maybe find an original article or an original video or something.
Actually, that's one good thing about Google, is that they have started a new initiative to try and make sure that credible sites offering credible information, especially on things like COVID, comes up high in search. So basically they're looking out for credible organisations and trying to make sure that if you do research something like injecting bleach, does injecting bleach, or should I be drinking bleach to COVID-19, that what you'll get is pages and pages of really good information, and it's not until you get to page 10 or something that you'll find the shonky stuff. So I think that's a really good initiative.
That's great. That's really great. So Susannah, you were saying before we went to air that you've obviously been really busy this year, first with the bushfires and now with COVID-19. So you're really right in the thick of it. And I know things are changing quite quickly, but how do you think the relationship between science and news media might play out over the next few months here in Australia?
Well, look, I think that one of the issues has been the fact that COVID has swamped everything else. So, we mustn't forget, I mean, COVID-19 is a sort of a science and social issue, obviously. But there are plenty of other ones that are really, really important, and which have kind of gone to the back. And that's understandable. I mean, the news media reflects what people want to hear about, and they have to get hits after all. They've got to get eyeballs. But what that has meant is that there have been lots and lots of really important stories that haven't had nearly as much airplay and coverage as they should have had. We started to see a waning of this. We started to see some COVID fatigue coming in, with, I think, the public being a little bit, like, oh, well, I'm up to here with gloomy messages. And so there was a period of time when we started to get some more, especially quirky good news stories. There was a bit of an appetite there for a while for, tell me something positive.
Show me a baby animal, please.
Yeah. But, with this second wave in Victoria, unfortunately, COVID is back on the agenda, understandably. And, it has actually given us an opportunity to talk about some other things that are related, like mental health, for example. Mm-hmm. So there has been quite a strong focus on mental health, obviously around COVID-19, but that then, gives you an opportunity to talk about mental health more generally, about isolation, loneliness, there's a whole lot of things. So I think that, as the months go on, depending on what happens with COVID-19, we will get to a point, I'm sure, where we'll start to hear more about climate change, about water resources and all sorts of other things that we really need to be debating and discussing. that's my...
Absolutely. On climate change, while we have you here, I have a quick question. So that is something I've been seeing in news headlines, that now that there's less international travel and people are staying at home more, that's been a real benefit for climate change. Is that an actual good news story, or am I just hopefully reading headlines?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not an expert on climate change. So I probably shouldn't, but...
but...
I'm not an expert, but I have been talking to some experts in this particular area, and I mean, there was a positive story there for a while, but sadly, that's only part of the story. Travel is part of the story, but it's not the full story, because a lot of our emissions come from things like smeltering and manufacturing, and we're still using stuff. We still need stuff. We're probably producing more plastic than ever. Because of all of the PPE and all of these things. So it's not like we're not consuming. So unfortunately, I don't think, and there is also a sense, at least with some of the experts that I've been talking to, that once there's a vaccine and once people feel like they can travel and they can do more, then they're going to make up for lost time. And there's
oh, totally.
Yeah.
I've seen that even with bars opening again, people being like, woohoo, like just
right. I'll drink 3 months worth in the next week to make up for it.
We have very short-term memories, it seems.
And so, Susannah, like, you have been very busy, as we were talking before the show, was it September last year with the summer fires, and then pretty much straight into COVID. So you're probably looking for a little rest, and also planning, I hope, the craft workshop, everyone how to make a bullshit meter. But what's actually next for you?
Well, we've got some really interesting projects on the go. The one that I'm really excited about, which we actually have started, but it's sort of right in the thick of it now, so it's going to take us up, for months to come, is what we've called collaborative journalism. And that's where we bring experts actually into the newsroom to work alongside journalists. So we did one a couple of months ago. Actually, it was back in March now. God, time's going. With news.com.au on climate change and fires. And we had a dozen experts, 2 of which actually spent a lot of time in the newsroom guiding the journalists and working alongside them. So it wasn't just that the experts were an angle for the journalists. They were actually providing some of the content and creating unique content together with the journalists. So we're doing one with The Guardian now, and we're hoping to do one with Channel 9 soon. So, yeah, that's the most exciting thing for us right now.
Oh, brilliant. That's really exciting for us to hear too. That integrated approach sounds like a great way to start getting experts back into the newsroom again.
Yeah, of course, we did the first one, we were able to get them into the newsroom, but now, of course, it has to be done virtually. But, you can make it work, as we've discovered, haven't we? We're all doing things virtually. Here I am talking to you virtually. Feel like I've known you for ages.
Absolutely. I mean, you're in my home, so...
Yes. Where's my cup of tea?
I'm not a very good host. No, you're getting a cup of tea, Sam. Now, unfortunately, we're right near the end of this segment. So maybe do you have any suggestions for where people can look if this chat, I'm sure, has piqued a lot of interest for people about what you're working on now, but also maybe ways they can look at how media and science can work together? Where do you suggest they start?
Well, on our website, which is smc.org.au, there's a lot of information about things like the Collaborative Journalism Project and a lot of other projects that we're doing. But there's also a website that we've created called SCIMEX, or SCIMEX, nothing to do with Mexico. It actually stands for the Science Media Exchange. So it's scimex.org. And that has a lot of really interesting stuff about COVID, about not so much about the media, but there's a lot of, primary source information. So if you want to get to the primary source information about, everything from making masks to, whether bleach really does work, there's a lot of plus fundamental research is there. So I'd highly recommend people look at that.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, thank you so much for those suggestions, Susannah, and thank you so much for putting aside some time for us today and coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See ya.